Hello and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Lishan Huang. I am the Co-Executive Director of Learning and Programs here at AIGA, the Professional Association for Design. You're here at the Business Perspectives for Creative Leaders open house, and we have some folks from Yale joining us as well. I'm going to have a conversation with Rodrigo Canales and Tracy Weber-Shireen, and a conversation with all of you all to answer your questions about this program, which we've been doing in partnership with each other since 2008. I'm going to introduce our guests briefly. So we have Rodrigo Canales. He is the faculty head of the Executive Education Program, Business Perspectives Creative Leaders. He's also professor at BU. And then we also have Tracy Weber-Shireen, who works in marketing and innovation at the Yale School of Management, to answer your questions about the program. So let me just kick things off to Rodrigo first, and then we'll go to Tracy. We'll have a few questions amongst ourselves a little bit to just give you some overview of the program. Feel free to type in the chat at any time and we'll get to you. If you're feeling brave, we can also have you answer your question directly here in the Zoom room. But to turn it over to Rodrigo, you've been running this program at Yale for a while now. Since 2020, it's been an online program. But could you maybe just start with an overview of your background, what you teach, what you research, and then we can, after that, follow up with a bit of an overview of the curriculum for BPCL.
Yeah, thank you, Vishan. I'm delighted to be here with everybody. This is a program that I care a lot about. So in my trajectory, I've always researched questions about how people generate large-scale change, how people change complex organizations, how people change complex institutions. And, it has to do with a conviction that, progress requires often institutional change and organizational change, but by definition, it's really hard. And so throughout my career, I've always been interested in studying the people who make change happen. Also the people who try to make change happen and don't succeed, and understand the difference between those who succeed and fail. And because of the research that I do throughout my career, I've always taught issues of innovation, organizational innovation, systems level innovation, innovation within organizations, innovation beyond organizations. And so in some ways, a lot of my career could be, my teaching career especially, could be summarized as trying to bring, methodologies and insights from design and design thinking into management education. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, in contrast, bringing management theory and organizational theory to the creative professions. And so kind of like that's one way to think about at least that's one way in which I think about my teaching career.
Awesome. Thank you for that overview of your teaching and your research. Let's turn over and talk about the program. So this program's been going on since 2008. Since 2020, it has been delivered online, which allows for people all over more flexibility for creative leaders to join in on the program. Could you give us a brief overview of what this program is like in terms of the experience, a little bit about the curriculum? Folks can learn more, obviously, about the website, but just give some broad brushstrokes. And I'm sure that folks have some questions that can chime in about this in a bit as well.
And is that question for me or for Tracy?
Why don't I start with you, and then we'll bring Tracy into this as well.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you mentioned, in 2020, we were forced to move the program online for reasons that we all know. Yeah. And it was interesting because what we discovered is that by bringing it online and working really hard to make sure that people had a good experience, we were actually able to bring in a broader diversity of creative professionals who were actually very interested in taking the program, but who had an almost impossible time, flying over to the East Coast and spending a week in an executive education program. But in the way we kind of like formatted it, it actually ended up being very attractive and very functional for them. And so what we really have worked hard to accomplish is to create a program that delivers an educational experience almost as if you were in the same room with people. We really do work hard to bring in a lot of interaction, a lot of small group interactions into the online experience. Um, for example, one of the and I say this in the program often. To me, one of the most valuable things about the program is that it creates a cohort of people, all of whom are facing relatively similar sets of challenges and questions that otherwise feel pretty lonely in their questions and challenges. But all of a sudden, they find themselves in a cohort of people who, oh my gosh, we're all experiencing similar things. And so we can talk to each other and we can become supports for each other in these challenges and questions that we're facing. And so because we believe that that's one of the benefits of the program, we make sure that we create both moments within each of the sessions so that people can get to know each other and really work with each other. But also we have moments outside of the academic sessions. We have social gatherings, we have small group discussions or kind of like fire chat conversations with key designers or other folks or alumni from the program. And so we really try to balance having an academic experience that is meaningful, that is rigorous, where people can get really good content, while at the same time ensuring that both in the design of the academic experience, but also in the things that happen outside of the academic experience, people can really make social connections and can really build a cohort that will live beyond the program and that will become kind of like a supporting network for the people who participate. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think maybe this is a good time to bring Tracy in. Just before that, just to go over just some housekeeping kind of details. If you've just joined us late, we are recording this, and feel free to post in the chat any questions that you have. We are monitoring that as well. We want to actually devote most of the time to Q&A from participants. But just some key dates for folks to know. The program registration closes on January 9th, 2026. So you have a couple of months to get your applications in, and then it begins on February 12th. It runs for 6 weeks with a total of roughly 20 hours of contact time. So the commitment is about 5 to 6 hours per week with 3 to 4 hours a week of pre-work or homework. And the outcome is to develop your managerial and leadership expertise, to drive innovation, influence colleagues, and lead teams successfully. And because of this is a partnership between the Yale School of Management and AIG, it is really tailored specifically to creative leaders and some of the particular situations that creative leaders and designers in particular are working in. But now I'd love to introduce Tracy Weber-Sheeran from Yale. You work in marketing and innovation at the Yale School of Management. Tracy, welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk about this program. As you said, I lead marketing and online learning here in Exec Ed at Yale. But I started my career as a graphic designer and a member of AIGA. And I wish that this program had been available at the time as I was growing as a designer and expanding my focus from design to design plus management and leadership. And that's really the special sauce of this program is that as designers, we learn a craft, but as we move along our careers, there comes a time where the craft is not individual. It has to be in a group, in a small group, in a big group, in an organization, in society. And this program is really crafted to help people make that jump at the beginning of their career or as they're going along in their career, as the questions become more complex. So I love this program. Rodrigo and I were working really closely in 2020 when we moved this online. And I love what you said about one of the key benefits of this program is bringing creatives together to talk through as sounding boards for problems that come up that feel idiosyncratic, but are really common across organizations, whether you're a sole proprietor or you're working in a huge organization. These are really similar questions that come up. And what we found in those first cohorts, there were a lot of questions around, can we build community in these online spaces? Lots of questions, because we know how to build community in these programs, but can we build it in these online spaces? And I knew that we had when we were closing the first program, and Rodrigo was giving some final remarks, and we had tears from participants, tears of joy of going through this program. And I thought, all right, we did it. We made it. We connected people, connected these creatives with the knowledge they needed to go back into their working lives.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I wanted to talk a little bit also about what makes Yale School of Management different as well in terms of the approach. We know, of course, Yale is an Ivy League school. There are a lot of business schools out there, but the School of Management name is not just a semantic distinction. Obviously, you study and you teach business there, but the way that the curriculum is designed and the teaching is delivered, it's less siloed and integrated around maybe specific situations. Maybe this is something for Rodrigo to start, and then maybe Tracy, if there's anything you can add to that as well. I think folks would love to hear about the difference in terms of how this curriculum is structured.
Yeah, thank you. So, throughout my career, I've been involved in a variety of different business school programs, et cetera. And I was lucky to spend a lot of my teaching career at Yale because, as you were mentioning, like typically in business schools, classes are organized around disciplines. So the economists teach microeconomics and macroeconomics, and incentives, and then the psychologists will teach something about kind of like designing teams and human resources, and the sociologists will teach something about organizational design and strategy. And I think what Yale, the bet, very successful bet that Yale made many years ago now, is that they said, you know what, that is very convenient for the faculty who teach and who come from these disciplines, but that is not how problems present themselves in the real world to the people who were teaching. Problems don't present themselves to managers with a label on the problem's forehead that says like, oh, hi, I'm a microeconomics problem, or hi, I'm a psychological problem. Problems present themselves in their messy realities. And so Yale kind of like completely shifted the way they taught, from moving away from like vertical disciplines to kind of like horizontal problems, and having the faculty coordinate. For example, you have the employee perspective, right? And so employees and managing employees is something that all managers have to do. And as you're working with employees, there are questions of organizational design, there are questions of incentives, there are questions of like kind of like psychological processes. And so what happens is that the economists, the sociologists, and the psychologists have to work together to say like, all right, what does the best evidence from each of our disciplines bring to this question of how we manage people? Or if you think about kind of like, oh, how do I interact with investors? It's the same thing. Or how do you manage innovation in a firm? Right. And so when you're managing innovation in a firm, which is something that every organization has to do, well, you have some organizational issues, you have some psychological issues, you have some economic kind of like issues. And so in crafting each of these classes at Yale, there are these different disciplines that coordinate and agree on what is the best evidence and the best science of how we teach these issues, and they coordinate and they create a class together that is interdisciplinary in nature because it's kind of like more problem focused. And this is the kind of ethos, I think, that we have brought to this program.
Wonderful. Yeah, and for the folks who are here too, I'll post in the chat. This is from the website, which I also posted a link to, but this is a sample week-by-week curriculum over the 6 weeks of the topics that are covered. It is subject to change, but it gives you a high-level idea. As Rodrigo's saying, it's not necessarily like breaking it down in terms of like just economics versus HR kind of topics, but they're really based on these themes and high-level topic area, interest areas of like what you encounter, right, as a creative leader, from leading from within, so starting with yourself, marketing yourself in your work, decision-making for leaders, running your business, building your organization, and leading innovation. Rodrigo, can you tell us more about like, how do you fit into this curriculum in terms of?
Yeah, so First, I mean, I think I want to pick up on something that Tracy mentioned earlier, because it really is the driving force behind this program, which is um, when we've interacted with, we've worked with creative professionals, what we have found is almost all of them have gone through a similar trajectory than what Tracy was describing, which is you become a creative professional because you have a craft and you have a talent for that craft. And that craft is usually kind of like built around kind of like what creative professionals have as their superpower, which is their ability to connect and to empathize and to kind of like feel and to bring that empathy and that observational power into and turn them into insights that you can then kind of like bring them into whatever it is that you're doing, right? And so that's the craft. And that's what creative professionals are excellent at. And as they succeed in their craft, and then as they kind of like continue, exercising the craft, there comes a moment in their career where precisely because they've been so good at their craft, all of a sudden, either if they're in an organization, they get promoted, and now it's no longer about their individual exercise of their craft, but now they have to manage creative professionals. Or if it's their own gig and their own firm, there comes a moment where they're having so much success that it cannot be themselves anymore. They have to hire other people and they have to grow their firm. And so at that moment, at that transition point, what creative professionals find is that there's something that brought them here, which is the excellence in their craft that is not going to get them there, which is like, oh, I now need to have managerial and organizational capacities that I've never had to develop, but that's what it's going to take me to continue succeeding in my career. And that is the ethos behind this program, is saying like, all right, what are the most common questions and challenges that we see creative professionals face as they're in this moment of transition? And again, what can we offer you as frameworks and toolkits that will help you kind of like navigate these questions? And that's kind of like how we've crafted this program, and that's why the program looks the way it does. Yeah, and I don't know if that fully answers your question, Lishan, and I don't know if you want to, Lishan, if you want to kind of like amplify it, or if that kind of answers what you were asking.
Yeah, I mean, I want to riff on it, right? As you were saying, and what Tracy had mentioned before, but this program is designed specifically for mid-career and senior professionals who are in some sort of creative industry. So you don't just have to be a graphic designer or UX designer. There's architects who are coming to this. The cohorts are usually about 40 to 45 participants per cohort. But it really is about like, how do you integrate that, right? As Rodrigo, you were just saying, like there's the craft that a lot of us study to get in the door of our creative professions, and then we get noticed, we get promoted into management, or we hang up a shingle and start our own studios or design firms or whatnot. And then certainly this happened to me, right? It's like I went to art school, worked at an agency, started my own studio. Like luckily my co-founder had a business background, but a lot of this is really thinking about those things. Maybe you've learned it on the job, or you're trying to like maybe integrate that side of your creativity, your empathy, or just even the point of view, right? The way that design helps you see the world, help you see, how do you build a team? How do you communicate the value of what you do? And then integrate that with all of this business stuff, right? Being able to understand, maybe the metrics, the quantitative side of things, bringing in, applying this to almost like designing your career or designing your team, even if your background is in designing buildings or designing posters, websites, whatever that craft might be, and really kind of expanding that craft.
Yeah, and I guess one of the, again, also riffing off of what you're saying, we've had folks from more traditional creative crafts like graphic design and industrial design. We've had architects, as you say. We've also had developers, coders, programmers who are more on the creative side of things, and then all of a sudden they get to a point where it's the same thing. What project here is not going to bring you there? We've had people from NASA who are like on the design engineering side of things, working mostly in the creative side of design engineering, where now they're managing a ton of people and they need something like this. And so we really have had it is designed to have a very broad umbrella of what we see as the creative professionals. And also, we have people from small firms, from individual practices, from large firms, and also people from slightly different stages of the career. But most of them do have some experience and are in that process of needing to learn how to manage and how to design organizational structures and incentives, et cetera.
I want to take this opportunity to open up to questions. I think usually it's a slow start, or we're waiting for a brave individual with the first question. You're welcome to come on screen and ask it yourself, or just type it in the chat and I can read it out and then send it over to Tracy and or Rodrigo to answer. Most of the logistics stuff we have covered already in terms of that process. We also have Joanne Legler, who is from Yale as well, who can help answer questions in the chat. But since we are recording and folks might be watching this in the future, we'll voice over anything that people ask as well as the answers as well. While you're thinking, maybe you can also post like a little bit about where you're coming from. And I'm starting to see questions, so we can go here. We'll start with Michelle's question first. What kind of homework can folks expect to get for each session each week?
Great question. I would say there's two types of homeworks. One is you'll often get some sort of preparation for an upcoming session. Like there's some reading that you'll have to do. There may be a case you have to prepare. And so that's often one of the things that is required. I will say that for example, the reason why it's important to have somebody like Tracy and somebody like me co-designing a program is because as an academic, I might want to give people more homework. But Tracy will say like, hey, you have to remember these people are working and they're professionals. And so we're always trying to find the right balance between let's make sure that they have a meaningful preparation for what's coming and that we prepare them in a way that they're going to maximize the benefits that they get from each session, while at the same time being extremely mindful of the fact that there are people in full-time jobs who have a lot of responsibilities, etc. And so that's one of the types of homework, is just the preparation activities that you'll have to do for each of the sessions. And Tracy, I think you have a better grasp than me of on average, how much time people can expect to spend on this work. But before I pass it on to you for that, there's a second type of homework that to me is the most interesting, which is every week when I start the morning session before they start the session with whichever faculty is going to be teaching that day, we always have a small conversation about, all right, based on what we learned last week, what experiments did you run? Like we want folks to actually try to experiment with some of the stuff that they're learning and to conduct some experiments throughout the week so that they can run the experiment, come back to the next session and have a conversation between all of us about like, well, I tried this and this is kind of like what I found. And I thought this was interesting, but it generated these other questions. And that exchange at the beginning of the day is, at least for me, is one of my favorite parts of the program because people are experimenting with the stuff that they're learning as they're going. And they're discovering things about themselves, but it's also generating really interesting questions that everybody learns from. But Tracy, maybe you have, because you know much more about the details about the specifics that each of the faculty assign. And so how long can people expect to need to work for each of the sessions?
So we estimated about 3 or 4 hours of work per week, so pre-work per week. And that fluctuates week to week. But I just want to build on what you said on like the value of this work. So we know a bit about adult learners, and we know that adult learners learn best when we teach a little bit, give some time for them to integrate that learning into their lives and work, and then come back, talk about it, and then build from there. So the beauty of this program, in addition to just being more flexible, spreading the learning out week to week actually helps the learning process. And it is because we are able to, as Rodrigo said, test some of these ideas in real time. So that is kind of part of the experience of the program that's baked into the pre-work.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that answers Michelle's follow-up question too. How much of the homework would be relevant to our individual practice instead of being more of a generic use case? I think you touched upon that, but just to be clear, like some of them are based on like experiments that you can run in your real job, right? Or reflecting on your situation.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's kind of like half and half. Like there's some, because in some of these things we're trying to teach you principles. Are so, for example, in my class, I teach you principles of organizational design, and so that is you're reading about the principles, right? But then you will be asked to think about, well, how does this apply to your thing? And there's other sessions for which the preparation will be like you're going to have to do an assessment of how you make decisions individually and how that works in your organization. And so that's going to be very, very much kind of like specific to the things that you're facing. And so I think it's a combination of both.
Got it. There was a question about a justification letter for employers. That's on the Yale School of Management website, so I posted a link to that. I think the stack here is there's Chris, who has a two-part question, then we'll get to Joshua, Camilla, and Sandy in that order. But let me get to Chris first. So Chris wanted to know if this was geared towards in-house or agency designers, and then he also wanted to know about how different faculty members are utilized. Like, are there different instructors per segment? How that breaks down per day, since it's not like strictly disciplinary siloed based learning.
Yeah, great questions. So I think we kind of mentioned a little bit earlier how again, because this is about the types of challenges that creative professionals face as they're moving up in their careers. It really the discussions and the principles and the frameworks really apply to both kind of like in-house and agency roles. Like it's more about how you advance in your career as a creative professional. And by the way, we've had alumni who, after the program, they left the organization that we're in to start their own thing, and vice versa. They were kind of like more of a small designer, and then they joined a large organization and to lead a team of designers, right? And so we've had all kinds of transitions supported by what people learn through the program. And so it's a broad umbrella of kind of like what creative professionals need. And because we frame things around kind of like the questions that people are facing, like each day usually has a faculty member or a combination of faculty members that are like the team or the individuals that can most help you navigate those questions. And even in cases where we have just one person, for example, in my day of teaching, even though you just get me that day, in my career, teaching with other faculty and other disciplines, like I've learned to integrate the principles from economics and from psychology into the stuff that I teach. And so even when you get just one individual for a particular topic, you're still getting an interdisciplinary approach to the problem that we're addressing for that day. But each of the faculty that you will meet throughout the program are like kind of like the true stars and the people who in many cases literally wrote the book on how to address those specific issues. And so that's how we choose the faculty for the different segments.
Wonderful. I think, Joshua, you're next if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah. So my question is, how designer specific is the information? I come to creative professional through like a copywriting role, like senior copy and content production. So like, is this course still relevant for me, or is it sort of suited for designers?
I mean, Tracy, I'd love to get your perspective. I would say that we have a preponderance of designers. Like it's off. Like we have more designers than others, but you will definitely not feel like an odd duck as a copy editor and as a copyright person in the group of people. Because again, we have people who are programmers and coders and architects, and we have other types of creative professionals who come from slightly different aspects of the creative craft. But nonetheless, what you will find, which is really interesting, is that even if you come from this other angle, you will share a lot of the challenges and a lot of the struggles that these other creative professionals are facing. But Tracy, I would love to hear your thoughts about that.
I completely agree, Rodrigo. Joshua, I think you would you'd be welcome. I think you would find your people in this group. It's really for all creatives. So creative writers, designers, all creatives.
Awesome. Thank you. I think Camilla, you're next. If you want to unmute.
Hey everyone, thanks
Hi.
for the time here. So just a quick question around some of the things I heard you guys said really resonated as it pertains to just the transition from being an individual contributor to a leader, right? However, I've been in leadership now for a little bit, and I was just wondering, as it pertains to leveling, if I can kind of say it that way, is this something that would be more so for someone who's maybe looking to make that transition, or maybe in the earlier stages of the transition into formal leadership, creative leadership, versus someone who's sort of already been in it for a little bit longer, and just trying to figure out where on the spectrum this is really trying to target from a archetype standpoint?
Great question. So I think from a program design perspective, I think the philosophy was to really think of somebody who kind of like had started this transition and has been swimming in those struggles for a little bit, not for a very long time, but has been swimming in those struggles for a little bit. And they're like, I need something else. Like, this is just not cutting it for me. I'm constantly feeling like I'm kind of like, either I swim really hard, but I can barely keep my head above water, or there's problems that I'm facing that I just really am not sure if I'm solving them in the best approach, etc. Right? So the ideal kind of like candidate, I think, or the ideal archetype, if you will, for whom this program was designed, was somebody like that, who's been swimming in those struggles for a little bit, and will all of a sudden get a breath of fresh air and be like, oh, okay, there is a way for me to think about this problem in a way that makes it just much easier, and I don't have to struggle as much. Having said that, I think what we find in our cohorts is that we have a breadth of people, some who have actually been struggling for that a lot longer, and they're kind of like later and they're more senior, and they've been at it for a bit longer, but they still want to join because they still benefit tremendously from it. And we also have people who are earlier in their career, and they can see, either because somebody told them that, you better get on this now because that will save you struggles in the future. And so we have a variety of people that are in the program. And I have to say, like, we appreciate that variance, because in these conversations that I was mentioning that are my favorite, about like, well, what experiments did you run, and what did you try, and what did you face? Very often you run an experiment, and then somebody will say like, well, some of the more senior people will say, well, actually, so I've been doing this for 15 years, and this is the way I have traditionally been solving it. And only in the past 2 weeks have I realized that actually there was a much, much better way. And so there's this very rich kind of like cross-fertilization, if you will, across the diversity of both creative professionals, but also stages in the career from which people are joining us. Tracy, does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. And I think that depending on the stage, you're going to take different learnings from the same teachings, right? So I don't know if many people have, or if anyone has, but this is a program that you could go back to throughout your career, and you would take something different from it at different stages of your career, because you hear different things from the faculty, you hear different things from your peers, you have different questions coming in. So it really is a pretty wide range. On the website, we say, built for mid-career and senior professionals. That's pretty vague, kind of deliberately. As Rodrigo said, there's a wide range. But I would also say on the website, we have some profiles, some spotlights of profiles of past participants, and those give a good sense of some of the people who have come through the program. And And always you can reach out to us, to our team, to talk about your individual goals, your individual professional goals and learning goals, and we can help you see if it's a good fit.
Let me go through some of the things that are happening in the chat to sum up and get it on the recording. But Chris was asking if there was a certificate that people who completed the course get, and the answer was yes. You get a certificate of completion when you finish the course, and you can post it on your LinkedIn or print it out. There was a next question online here in the chat from Sandy. It's asking, how is AI-assisted design are topics around AI-assisted design in the program, or is there anything else related to leading in this age of AI, I think is the general gist of that question.
Interesting, Sandy. So I think we haven't explicitly integrated stuff about AI-assisted design into the program. And every person who's teaching anything, anywhere, especially in business schools, we are all really grappling with the questions of how is AI changing everything I know and everything I've been teaching about this stuff. Both in terms of how does it change what I teach, but also how does it change what people are going to face as regards to the problems that I teach about. And so I think there's some really, really interesting and important questions about the implications for AI-assisted design as we think about professional incentives, as we think about career progression, designing careers for people who are joining your organizations. And so there isn't right now anything specific about AI-assisted design. I think partly because the jury is still way out on exactly what is going to happen. I can tell you that in business schools, we are having conversations about the implications of AI-assisted fill in the blank constantly. And we're all changing the way we teach and how we teach and what we teach based on it. And so I think indirectly, we are definitely going to have a lot of things to think about and say regarding how AI will likely affect the design profession and the creative professions. But there's nothing explicit right now. That we don't have a module on AI-assisted stuff, for example. I don't know if that answers the question.
I would just add in that the way that this program rolls out and learners engage with it is there is a lot of discussion, right? Rodrigo, in particular, does a great job of just opening conversations throughout the teaching. And so if there's a topic that is really important to the cohort, that will continue to come up in conversations throughout the whole program.
Wonderful. The next question is from Jamie, who says, I attended the the Business of Design Conference of 2018. How does this align, compare, or build with some of the concepts discussed in that conference? I unfortunately did not work at AIGA yet, so I didn't go to that conference. I don't know if Tracy or Rodrigo, you were there, but I think there is another question. We could follow up on that and look into it, but there is a more general question, which is, do you touch on building a culture of design within an organization?
Yeah, so, and I would actually suggest that it doesn't seem that way, but it's very connected to Corey's question. So Corey writes, with regard to bridging the gap between major stakeholders and creatives, how much do you dig into finance, KPIs, and OKRs, and how they may directly tie to the creative side? I think those questions are actually very, very connected. One of the reasons, maybe the biggest reason why I so strongly believe in this program is that I have always believed that creative professionals should be playing a much more central role in how we think about strategy, how we think about organizational design, how we think about organizational growth. Because creative professionals are the ones who can really bring in the perspective of the people whose lives we're affecting. Both people outside of the organization and inside of the organization. And I've always believed that we leave those perspectives out of our strategy making and business planning at our peril. At the same time, I think that creatives tend to often have difficulty explaining the value of what they do to the organization. And so often in the way we design business models, in the way we design business strategy, in the way we design things in organizations, the creative profession is brought in too late in the process. We've already made some decisions about strategic design or organizational design or business model design. And based on those decisions, we hand it over to creatives to say, like, all right, now go help me sell this or help me kind of like figure out a way to make this better. But we've already made some fundamental decisions that if we had only integrated the creative profession earlier, everybody would have benefited tremendously. And so one of my personal goals with this program is to give creative professionals the language, the toolkits, so that they can become much better at advocating for the creative profession as a necessary partner in how we're thinking about strategy, how we're thinking about organizational design, how we're thinking about business model design. And again, it very often should fall on the creatives themselves to be able to explain in the language that the organization will understand why you want me at that table earlier. And that's what often is missing, right? And so what we try to do in this program is to tell you, well, this is the language that they will understand, and this is what you need to learn. This is how you need to learn to speak that language so that you can make this case, right? And so yes, Jamie, like we absolutely touch on building a culture of design within organizations. And Corey, it is really about like understanding how do we engage with finance and how do we use the language of organizations to make the case for the creative professions.
Wonderful. We have a follow-up question from Michelle about measuring success from folks who have gone through the program or how you do follow-ups with alumni. I know there's a pretty big and illustrious network of folks who've gone through this program over the years since 2008.
Tracy, I think you know much more about that than I do.
Yeah, I would just say in terms of how people stay connected after going through this program, one, people stay connected after going through this program. Hands down, we hear of friendships, we hear of road trips, we hear of a lot of just phone calls asking, as I said, a sounding board forever. So people do stay connected. The way Exec Ed helps in those connections are through a LinkedIn group, through webinars and ongoing lifelong learning. But a lot of times we see that the cohorts support each other and support their successes by self-organizing. So they organize in a million different ways, whether it's Slack or LinkedIn or Signal or WhatsApp, but they're really connected. Where we report out their successes, you'll see some of them in the spotlights of the participants, but we love to hear about their successes. And then part of the marketing team's job is really to share out those stories about how people have taken the learning and put it to work.
Yeah, I mean, to this day, I think it was last week, I got an email from Michael Beirut, who saw something about this program somewhere, and he emailed me and he was like, Rodrigo, I'm so happy this program's still running. It changed my life. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's Michael Beirut. And it was like just wonderful. Same with Robert Fabricant, who became a good friend through this program, and stuff that happened after. And so we hear from all kinds of alumni, including very illustrious alumni. And we're always delighted to hear that.
That is wonderful to hear. I'm just scrolling through the chat to make sure I haven't missed anything that's gone through, but I think we've covered everything so far. Do we have any? Oh, Andreas.
Good afternoon, everyone, or evening, morning, depending on what time zone you may be in. My name is Andreas. I am currently finishing up my degree in undergrad at Bowie State University, but I have been completing, or rather continuing my work professionally as a freelance designer. And going back to school and also just in my professional practice, I found personally, okay, Leon, go Bowie. But in my professional practice, I found that one thing I'm really drawn to is research. So I love to reference, look up other artists, designers, companies, agencies, projects, and creative, endeavors that have been successful, and also sometimes that have maybe not been as successful as they could have been, and also maybe how I would have tackled that as well. So to my point, or rather to my question, I'm curious what percentage or what portion of this curriculum is going to be focused on case studies or analyzing previous creative endeavors, projects, or modes of thinking that have been established.
I mean, Tracy, I have an estimate, but maybe you have a more accurate estimate than me, or we can bounce it off of each other. My intuition is about half and half, more or less, is like case studies. I don't think we do a lot of like, oh, let's look at this very specific kind of like creative endeavor and how it failed or succeeded. We have, the cases that I teach, for example, do very much rely on creative professionals and creative endeavors. But the case is not really about, the case is more about the principles of organizational design or organizational dynamics that we can observe in the development of those like creative endeavors. And so I do think that in the way the program is designed is really very much around, these are the types of problems that you'll face, and these are the types of frameworks and toolkits and approaches that are going to help you address those problems. It's much more that and much less of an academic exploration of, what kind of creative endeavors have succeeded or failed in history or something like that. So it's much more a practical exploration of the principles and tools and frameworks that are going to help creative professionals as they transition in their careers, and much less kind of like an academic exploration. I don't know if that makes sense and if that resonates with you, Tracy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just add that because I'm not Yale faculty, I can brag on our Yale faculty, but they are Yale faculty because they have done all that research. They might be presenting and teaching around and teaching you a practical framework and explaining that. And if you just ask one question about where this is coming from, there's a good chance that they can go on for 2 hours about what research is backing their one slide, right? These, like everything that is taught in these programs are rigorous research-based, but our goal is to make that sometimes dense research more applicable to the work you're doing. And I think that's one of the great superpowers of our faculty.
I think we have one last question in the chat about what are some of the themes and the feedback that you receive from alumni of the program? Like, what are some of the things that stick with you in terms of the feedback you get back from people who go through this?
Tracy.
Yeah, I think we've covered one pretty well, and that is the community that they build. So we hear a lot about that. In fact, I just heard a story about a guy from Austria who was building he wanted to do a U.S. road trip, and the U.S. road trip was going to be built from, like colleague to colleague who he'd met in this program. So the community is really important. But one of the things I'm struck by is just the confidence that this program imbues in the participants. I think, and I can't speak from experience, that as a designer or even as a strategist in agency world, I would get into these conversations and I was talking to the finance guy and I was talking to the HR person, and I just wasn't sure if I was on solid footing in talking their language, as Rodrigo said. And I think going through this program, you build a level of expertise and fluency in these different areas of business that allows you, gives confidence in making that next step in your career.
Yeah, and I would just compliment that, for example, I think again, Michael Beirut is somebody who often is a guest in some of our programs and some of our conversations about the program. And he always says that all of a sudden he found a new language that he had always seen other people speak, and that he kind of like was like, why are they having that conversation? How do I get into that conversation? And that all of a sudden he found a language that allowed him to be a part of that conversation, which ended up being a critical conversation for him to kind of like grow in the ways that he was wishing to grow. And so I think it's also this kind of like, oh, I now understand what they're talking about, and I understand how to talk in that language so that we will understand each other much better, and how to translate across disciplines. And so that's another set of feedback that I hear very frequently from our students. That there's a lot of stuff that we do in the program that is about understanding who you want to be as a leader, understanding how you make decisions, and how to make decisions in different situations, and then understanding how to work through others. And I often hear people talking about how that exploration of themselves as leaders, where they wanted to go as leaders, and the different ways in which they can make decisions was transformative, because it gave them, again, a new way of understanding what leadership is about and how they wanted to be as leaders. And so that I've also heard quite a bit.
Wonderful. All right, I think that covers it. So I'm going to call it, but I just wanted folks to know we'll send a recording of this out so you can review anything. Joanne from Yale, her email is on the website if you have any questions about admissions or that process. But remember that the deadline to sign up is January 9th, and we'll follow up with all of this over email as well. So thank you so much, Rodrigo and Tracy and Joanne and all of you for tuning in this afternoon or this evening, this morning, wherever you are in the world, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Pleasure. And I hope that I see many of these folks as students soon.
Take care. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.